Yes, but it is destroyed by the work of Jesus Christ.
George, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, there's a very big difference between making God the author of sin and saying that God can use sin. God has used sin. He uses evil, but God's not the author of moral evil because he's not an immoral being. He is ontologically incapable. By nature, he can't be the author of sin. So the problem with Calvinism is that it makes God, not by affirmation, even the Westminster Confession clearly states, and most confessions, Calvinist confessions, deny that God is the author of sin. But it's not what they affirm that concerns me, it's what they explain. Once they explain their position, it implies that God is the author of sin. And then when you get finally to that implication, what they say, it's a mystery, we've introduced it, but you're not allowed to talk about it.
Okay, George, a question here for you. Is faith a gift from God or an act on our part?
Well, I would agree again with Machen, and even in the Calvinist comment, or Calvin's comment in Ephesians 2-8, that it is a means by which to receive a gift. It's not a work, it's by definition something else. So it's an act in the sense. I would agree with Paul, for example, and Silas, when the man said, "What must I do?" They didn't say, "Don't do anything." They said, "Believe." So I believe that you must believe to receive. And again, even Calvinists argued that the decision we make, the coming to Christ, the choice that we make for Christ, and he talked about that a lot, is another way of talking about believing in him. But believing is not a work. So it's not a gift in the Calvinist sense of a gift. The breath I breathe is a gift, but not in the Calvinist sense. The Calvinist says, in effect, I know James White doesn't like this, but Calvinists say in effect that God believes in and through you, that ultimately he is the believer, not you. I mean, he makes you a believer by giving you a believing nature, but he really is the believer, not you. And I'm saying that salvation is God's job. Believing is our responsibility. Don't make God responsible for what he makes you responsible for. God is sovereign. Accept your responsibility and believe.
James, a rejoinder?
Certainly we do not in any way, shape, or form say that God is believing through us, and that is a totally invalid assertion. It does not follow from what is being said. What has been said, and there so far Mr. Bryson has not even attempted to respond to this, is that Romans chapter 8, verses 7 through 8 say those who are in the flesh cannot please God. We know that saving faith is something that is pleasing. Philippians 1:29 says it is something that has been granted to us, both that and our suffering for Christ. And so it is very plain that the issue here is that until regeneration takes place, and as long as a person remains a spiritually dead sinner, asking them to do something that is a spiritual activity is, of course, backwards. And we have not heard any responses to the biblical passages, to many of them that have been offered. And the one time we did discuss John 6:44, I would submit that the answer that was given there simply did not flow from the text and was not consistent with the grammar of the text at all.
Thank you. Question for James White. What effect does a Calvinist view of God's grace have on evangelism? If God chooses, why evangelize?
Awesome question. The first missionaries were all Calvinists, and there's a reason for that. They believed that God was glorified in their going out and proclaiming the gospel. And I'm going to have a hard time making it into 2 minutes for this one because I got a whole sermon on this. God is glorified when his truth is proclaimed. There are many groups today where the mission effort has been greatly minimized because of a denial of Reformed theology. What do I mean? Many people in the mission field are forced to function on the basis of charts and graphs that tell them how allegedly they should be having this rate of growth or this number of people attending, so on and so forth, as if the work of the Holy Spirit can be put on a chart or a graph. The earliest missionaries worked in areas where some had to work for 5 or 10 years before God granted them success in seeing their first convert. But that was necessary. Only a few years ago, if you took every one Mormon that left the Mormon church and became a Baptist, 24 Baptists became Mormons. There's a reason for a 24-to-1 conversion rate amongst these people, and it's because you can't hand a Mormon the 4 spiritual laws and expect him to get saved. It doesn't address them. It's like shooting a 22 at a tank. It takes time, it takes patience, and it takes a firm conviction that God is glorified when His truth is proclaimed, no matter what the result is. And folks, as we live in an ever more anti-Christian age, we need to get hold of this. Because if you start judging your evangelistic efforts on the basis of what kind of response you get when you're living in an apostate nation that hates God, you're going to stop evangelizing. God is glorified when His truth is proclaimed. When the apostles did that, it frequently brought them prison and death. We have to get hold of that and realize that. And that's why I'm going to be in Salt Lake City this coming Saturday passing out tracts to some of the toughest folks, because my God can even save Mormons.
And George, the question again, what effect does a Calvinist view of God's grace have on evangelism if God chooses? Why evangelize? You have a minute.
Well, first of all, there's a simple little statement that may seem silly, but it's true. If something doesn't make a difference, it doesn't make a difference. And your evangelism, of course, Calvinists say they want to obey God, so they obey God and evangelize. Or they want to glorify God, and so they evangelize. They want to please God, so they evangelize. And those are wonderful motives. But the effect of evangelism for the Calvinist or anybody else, according to Calvinism, is nothing. In other words, no person, the number is fixed. The whole thing has been rigged from all eternity. The issue in Calvinism is that from all eternity to all eternity, God has determined to save a specific group of people and not save the others. So it isn't going to make a difference. Now, they say God ordains the means, but even that means is fixed. Who is going to evangelize and who isn't? So if you don't, you weren't supposed to. If you do, you are. And you can't help it either way, though you think you can, because it appears you can.
Time. Okay, George, a question for you. Can you explain how Jesus was our propitiation, that is, takes away God's wrath, and then God returns His wrath onto some? I think the point is if He's the propitiation for the whole world, how does He then return His wrath on those who He's already propitiated?
Well, it would be like saying that I have enough money to buy the car, and this is enough money for you to buy the car if you'll take the money to buy the car. But if you don't take the money to buy the car, you don't have any money to buy the car. The propitiation is for you. The satisfaction is sufficient. The substitution is perfect. There's nothing more He needed to do. And even Calvinists would agree if it were His design or His purpose, what Christ did would have been adequate. But the fact is it wasn't His design or His purpose. That's why, by the way, folks, if any of you were out here